I have Akila here from Paramount, and those of you who know Paramount, which will be all of you, I'm sure, given the size of it, know that it's a hybrid ecosystem. They have Pluto, they have Paramount Plus, and they have a huge library and of content with production house as well. So they are unique in that whilst storytelling is at the center of the company, their distribution is vast and hybrid, and has been for some time. And Pluto, of course, is one of the original FAST platforms, having been launched in 2014. Then I have Kasha from BBC Studios, who I've also had the great pleasure of working with, and who has been working in FAST for some time. And you're here to represent what BBC Studios is doing in Europe, which is a subsection of what they're doing globally, and I'll just add that as a qualifier. And Sean, who some of you would have heard yesterday, who's representing Banijay. Banijay with its, I'll just, is it 21 channels over 80 streamed services, and of course the enablers, Amagi with Harry, who is running Amagi's services in Europe. And of course, it's great to have that broad perspective. We have the IP owners, we have the hybrid, and we have the enablers. So going on to this, I'm going to just ask everyone to just really briefly summarize what each of them are doing in the FAST space so that you get a sort of a framework of where they're at. I will say that this is an interactive session, so if people want to ask questions, please feel free to do so. I think the more conversation we have, the better. So, Akila, you've got, I think you're across 47 countries now?
Yes, that's right.
Pluto's launched across 47 countries. Yep. How many platforms?
It's 45 devices, 37 countries.
Okay. Now, do you want to say a bit more about your FAST strategy and where you're at and what you're doing at the moment and the content focus? Because one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting when we discussed is that you have really divided up the types of services that you have into 4 categories. You're owned and operated. You can't hear me from the back, so you want me to really just press it against my face. That's fine. We will all try and do that as we move forward. So, Akila, one of the things that was interesting is the way that you separate it. So you've got your owned and operated, your third-party branded.
Sure. I can talk about
and then your pop-ups and so forth. Do you want to talk about all of that?
Sure. So at Paramount, we're obviously uniquely placed. Can you guys hear me? Is the mic working? Okay. So we're uniquely placed in that we have 3 sort of streaming services all operating at scale in the market. So there's Paramount Plus, our SVOD service. There is My5, our BVOD service. And then, of course, there's Pluto, which is our FAST service. And Pluto, it's obviously owned by Paramount, but actually carries third-party content as well as our own. So it's sort of agnostic in that sense. There's 4 types of channels, as Nathalie was just saying, that we sort of carry. And so one is what we call Pluto TV owned and operated channels. So these are ones that are called Pluto TV Movies, Pluto TV Drama, and these are curated in-house by our team, and they work across different content providers to really curate these very specific niche Pluto TV channels. Then we also have branded channels, which is made up of, each channel is made up of content from only one content provider. So, for example, 5 Cops is one of our channels, and that's made up of Channel 5 content exclusively, all the sort of crime and cop content like Police Interceptors. Then the third type of channel is a single series channel. So there's, for example, Baywatch, Hell's Kitchen. These are, Judge Judy. The entire channel will just be made up of the one series. And then the last type of channel is sort of our pop-up and seasonal channels. And that's really the fun part of Pluto, where you can really respond to what's going on. Valentine's Day, you can have an anti-Valentine's channel, or Halloween, there'll be like a lot of, scary stuff. There'll be Christmas. Sometimes they'll do, Christmas in summertime, just because, Pluto is tongue-in-cheek in that way. So those are sort of the 4 types of channels our team curate.
Thanks for that. And that's really interesting. I'll ask questions later on the difference between the single IP channels, because there's a couple of strategies, and the windowing, because I think that's quite an interesting point and where that goes to. Kasha, do you want to just sort of talk about what you've been doing since you've been at BBC?
Yes, hello. So BBC is very much at the beginning of this journey in European markets. But FAST, in a way, is our branded service entry into the markets where we do not have a linear proposition. And this is France, Italy, Spain, and Germany. And the model is evolving, but we very successfully have partnerships already with Pluto TV, Samsung TV Plus, Rakuten, and Freevee. And as Nathalie has mentioned, we've got 2 types of channels. We've got the single IP channels, Doctor Who and Top Gear. And then we have genre-based channels, BBC Drama, BBC Travel, Food, and History. And the single IP channels have a very strong heritage. It's the single point destination for all superfans who do not kind of use it in order not to scroll through a much larger broadcast schedules. And it's a really good differentiator, while the multi-genre channels, they kind of showcase the breadth and depth of BBC archives. So we've got the genres basically ranging from factual, lifestyle, and scripted. And the content is curated in a very careful way in order to make sure that it's easy for our kind of viewers to find the content.
Kasha, I just noted that you said something, and I wanted to pick up on it, that you've launched these in territories where you don't have your branded channels, as opposed to Paramount that has a more general approach to distribution. That's right? It's only where... Is that a current policy?
I would say it's not a part of the strategy as such, but in a way it was a really good opportunity, as that's where the kind of FAST first started in Europe. So it was a really good opportunity to test how the linear proposition would perform.
And we're going to talk about fandoms and, going from a base of people who know the brands and so forth in a minute across all of that, but I'm sure that went into your calculations. Sean, you did... Sorry, I am trying to use the mic, I forget. Thank you for reminding me, and please do. Sean, you spoke yesterday about your FAST channels, but let's hear a bit more about, the thinking behind the launches and what your ambitions are there.
No, absolutely, and thank you so much, Nathalie, there. So, for Ballinger Rights, Fast Channels is another revenue distribution model, and it's one that we deem incremental to our finished tape and format business. So to set the scene, Ballinger Rights currently has 21 unique fast channels live globally, which have been syndicated to 80 different streams. So we're working in all of those major key territories for fast channel distribution, which would be the US, Canada, UK, Germany, France, Brazil, and most recently, Australia and New Zealand. And I think very much to complement what Kasha was describing, Ballinger Rights certainly takes an approach of fast channels of looking at both single IP fast channel launches as well as also aggregated genre-based channels. So for our distribution, we're certainly looking at our back catalogue, which is now amassing around 150,000 hours of content. So we're really looking at those rich formats, the IP that has had a first or second or third window run in a key territory, and then obviously distributing fast accordingly. So some of those single IP formats would include the likes of Deal or No Deal, Fear Factor, Survivor, MasterChef, The Biggest Loser. And then in terms of aggregation, we've launched very country-specific aggregated channels. So for example, here in the UK, in Q3 of last year, we launched Horizons, which is powered by Ballinger and which is also the home of our UK entertainment catalogue. In Germany, we've launched aggregated channels, but very localized, with scripted German dubbed, for example. So certainly a global take on FAST.
And it's interesting, we can also already see the difference in approach between these three IP owners. And you have said that Banijay takes very much a distribution approach. You're looking at third and fourth window. BBC, it's brand extension. It's connecting with audiences that are fans of your big super brands and serving them in territories where they haven't been. And of course, Paramount and Pluto, it's part of a total ecosystem that you produce for and deliver to across the globe. So slightly different points of reference in building out a FAST strategy and motivations. Harry, you're the great enabler through Amagi. Do you want to say something about Amagi and about how you're enabling the growth of these services and the variable strategic focuses of these services?
So Amagi is a technology provider in the FAST space, work with both platforms as well as media owners in the space. We allow stakeholders on both sides to create services, manage services, distribute and monetize services. We provide tech across the end-to-end chain. Essentially, a media owner with just content could give in content and be completely hands-off and look at revenue towards the other end of the pipe. That's what we built as a technology ecosystem. We continuously innovating. It's a market, as you said, it's 2 years, but we've been working on this now since 2014 when it initially started back in the US. We've been constantly building elements, tying in elements and innovating on them as a more comprehensive streaming-based ecosystem develops. To complement this technology stack, we also, and given the number of channels we do, so we do about 2,400 channels globally on the FAST space and about 700 in broadcast. And to complement both sides, we support customers with distribution advisory. Sometimes we could also support with commercial deals via our contract. And on the advertising side, we have an ad sales business as well, which again complements companies as they get into the business and they grow. And we have models to enable companies to build their own ads business on top of whatever organically they can build as a revenue base from there on.
And you have a very significant share of the FAST market in terms of enabling that. So therefore, you have access to very interesting data, which we'll discuss later, on what people are watching and how these services and what genres of these services are working. So, and you've kindly agreed to share with us that from your FAST report recently. So thank you for that. But you have that unique position of being able to look across all of these services. Okay, so I think with that in mind, I wanted to focus and drill down a little bit more about the practicalities of launching a FAST service. And I wanted to thank Amagi for producing this slide, because it really is about sort of the bare bones of what it takes to launch a FAST service. I want to step back into how you decide to do your FAST service and what are the practical considerations, to what extent, and we've seen that there's a slightly different strategy depending on who the IP owners are. How do you decide on your proposition? At what point is there a scalable or desirable proposition in terms of your IP? And with that, I want to address the issue that people haven't been addressing to date, which is how many hours of content do you need to actually launch a sustainable service? And because that is changing. We were in the early days of FAST, and of course, the early days of FAST, much like the early days of Pay, you could throw together a whole bunch of archive content and repeat it, and it would work. We're now getting into a more sophisticated and competitive environment, and in order to have a sustainable audience that comes back to you, you need what actually is familiar to people who've done pay TV services. You need a curated service with a certain number of hours and a certain number of refresh rates. But let's see in practice how that works. I'll speak with, well, Sean, you go first because you're second, third window, and third and fourth window, so you have very fixed ideas, but you also have properties that have very powerful fan bases. So tell us about how you come to the point where you're launching a service and where you think and what you think the optimal number of hours are for that sort of service and the refresh rate in your case.
I think it's certainly always front of mind around content volume and recognizable IP. And I think that's certainly our take on any fast channel distribution. I think, Akila, it would be great to hear from a platform perspective what the optimal number is. And I think we've gone on a journey where it started at one point and we're probably reaching, into the couple of 100 to 300 hours to maybe to start launching.
So 300 hours now. What was the start point?
I think it was 50.
There we go. So those of you who have small libraries with 50 hours of content, please take heed. You may need to partner with people in order to produce the volume you need to be able to launch now on the platforms. But we'll hear soon whether that is where the platforms are going.
But I think as well, volume is one thing, and then, of course, content refresh is another. And I think Balanchier's approach at the moment is certainly to leverage back catalogue.
Yep.
And I think when you're launching a single IP fast channel, you know that you have a finite amount of content, particularly if a show maybe is decommissioned. So it's not only are you potentially working with Deal or No Deal, which has, let's say, 250 hours of content, it's going to be about how you market that channel. It's going to be how you program that channel. And I think that's really the key of success when distributing, thinking about where Deal or No Deal is recognizable. For example, it's a major US format, it's a major UK format, Australia as well. How do we distribute? So we're thinking about launching, of course, in the US. Can we get into the UK, into Australia, into New Zealand? So for our standpoint, when we're thinking about launching fast channels, it's going to be about that. If it's going to be single IP, it's going to be volume, and it's going to be recognizable IP that's obviously had a first or second window run, and then it is going to be absolutely what is that content refresh, or what's possible. And I think if it's not possible, how do you program accordingly? How do you work with the platforms to market? And I think there's lots of obviously open conversations there.
And that last piece we'll go back to because it's a really interesting piece in a very competitive market. Akila, from a total perspective and a platform perspective.
Yeah, sure. So at Pluto, I think curation is really at the heart of the success of the service. So again, we work with third-party partners, including BBC Studios and Banerjee, and we basically have a team of programmers who are passionate about their verticals, and we have like literally up in Camden in our office, we have like a history buff, we have an 80s and 90s nostalgia fan, we have like someone who's a fanatic around criminal content, and these are fans who then will curate these channels that they would love to watch, and then they basically tap into the fans into these passion verticals, leading to these really long watch times. So for us, while the content itself might not be original, it's the packaging and the curation of the content that is key. And to answer your question, I think, Sean, you summarized it quite well in terms of number of hours and the considerations you have to take. I think you can, within that 50 and 300 range, anywhere there, still have a really successful channel based on the strength of the IP, based on how much content you have to refresh. So I think, yeah, that sounds like about the spectrum within which like currently channels are operating.
So it's what, 300 hours plus?
We just talk about it. So it sort of started at 50, it's moving to a few hundred, but anywhere in that range, I think, still based on the strength of the content. And again, the passion vertical that's being tapped into. I think that...
yeah, and as we see premium brands diversified fast, I think we're going to see a different type of fast offering too. And I suspect that coming into the mix will be original content and how that plays out in a fast environment, which we're not quite yet at as a driver. But of course, watch that space, we'll see the evolution of the curation and rollout of fast channels. Harry, I'm going to go to you now because we come to this next box, which is the management. And I think there are lots of complexities. We have an ideal scenario, and I'm going to come back to you, Akila, as a platform as well on that. So one of the challenges in managing the environment for fast, other than the sheer number of services, is in this initial phase is the metadata and the actual elements that you need in order to hello the elements you need in order to actually really build the channel successfully. So we have heard, for instance, of the challenge when you're looking at third and fourth window content of not having enough assets to be able to create a really dynamic environment. We've heard of some of the challenges on the metadata. Do you want to share some of your learnings and experience and maybe insights for other people on what might work and how you should think about preparing your channel, managing your channel when you're actually in the ecosystems and distributed across multiple platforms?
We could spend an hour discussing that and still not finish. But broadly structuring it from a discussion standpoint, if I look at a customer, they would have cost considerations in terms of how they operate. They may want a thin base. Most of them would want a thin base. Again, it's third rights, fourth rights window for many of them, and it's not a how to put the approach towards it. Can I make money with as much thin effort in terms of internal costs as well as a vendor cost or servicing costs? And with that comes operational considerations as to how they position the product, run the product. For a single branded channel, it could be possibly easier in terms of cycling through how a linear service could run. But when it comes to multi-genre content, there's a lot more involvement on the operation side for the customer because they need to measure what's happening and in turn evolve and adapt some of the schedules. And third perspective could be one's cost, one's the operational considerations in terms of running it, and third is in terms of how you're presenting it to the end consumer. We're seeing clearly in terms of how programmatic advertising run and revenue comes in. There are one of the customers was talking to us about timing to the hour, timing to the half hour, because those habits are not going away. So some of the automation we give customers, we're trying to time content to end on the hour, end on the half hour, etc. So there are presentation considerations as well. And when I say presentation, it could also be how your channel looks and feels, the quality of video on screen, etc. So those are broad operational considerations. Again, we're trying to solve it with technology. Obviously, as you scale and as this business scales and a lot of tier ones coming in, there is a lot of emphasis on quality, reliability, and service performance on us as vendors.
And you see that pulling up everybody's requirements because you can't have a delta in the quality for the audience. It really...
Correct. It is pulling up everybody's requirements, but what we are trying to do is take a step back and solve it operationally. For example, solve it via technology rather. For example, can we look at analytics in terms of performance and make automatic recommendations or build schedules automatically for our customers so that they are not spending the cycles in terms of people and internal costs on running services or building services which are more tuned to what performance.
And presumably that works particularly well for single IP channels, that automation process.
It works, obviously, naturally, it'll easily work for single IP channels, but on multi-IP channels as well, it's essential because otherwise you go into archaic models of having one person managing how a content's presented, and it becomes too expensive as more IP starts becoming visible on these kind of services.
So I think you've just made a point, more IP becoming visible on the services. You know, there's almost a level where it becomes clutter and people get overwhelmed. How are the platforms dealing with that? And Akila, there's a couple of things that I'm interested to understand because I did read somewhere that there was you were able to customize some of the UI on some of your services. What is your thinking, and what have you developed there to create a more sort of individual presentation of the services? And I don't know whether Amagi has also delved into that, but let's start with you, and then we'll talk about other tools and marketing as a sort of awareness driving.
Yeah, sure. So from a product perspective, the product is built and run in-house. In fact, there was a press release recently about our all-international female product team.
Yes, that was brilliant, actually.
Yeah.
If anyone wants a copy of that, it's a very interesting article about an amazing all-female international product team at Pluto.
Yeah.
And they have some very interesting insights as to what they're focusing on. It was very interesting to read.
So I digress. The point was that from a product perspective, in terms of showing the content, we build the product in-house, and it's managed by our editorial team. Our editorial team sort of works on categorizing the content and constantly trying to refine the way people sort of access the content. There's one channel called the default channel, which is the channel when you sort of launch the app, there'll be something playing automatically. So that's an editorial choice. Our team sort of looks at every month, like that channel obviously by default will get a lot of views. So, what channel is that? And then the rest of our categories really are managed by the team. We don't currently, because it's a frictionless experience, it's completely seamless, but our team is always refining based on the data that we have, how people are accessing content and how to sort of surface it within the EPG.
Is this something that Amagi is looking at as well, or is that something that is more...
We are indeed looking at layers of personalization coming in as more content comes in, as there's more choice that is in front of the customers. We do expect layers of personalization. You could look at a simple level, something curated is interesting. What Akila spoke about is very interesting, but maybe a little bit higher level than that, or prior to that, you could look at an EPG level customization for cohorts of consumers, and platforms have enough data or need to synthesize data to look at models like that. We are also looking at channel level personalization. You could have the same content presented differently for different consumers, and we have Sean and Kasia to go on mobiles and phones beeping as well. Yeah, so so we are looking at layers of personalization coming in. It's extremely important for consumption to stay on course, for viewers to have a choice and variance, but tuned to a certain demography that they belong to in terms
of that democracy is something that we've talked, that is important. It's both democracy of access, which I'd like to talk to about now. How do you negotiate your position with the platforms, and how do you ensure that you are able to get a position where you can be distinguished from the crowd, and democratization in terms of individual customization, which we've, this whole CTV sessions, there's been a lot about personalization and the challenges there. So let's go now to access and positioning on the platforms, and let's go to the people who have the hard task of negotiating that. Kasia, what's your experience of that? What do you think are the key things that are important to an IP owner in terms of positioning? There's obviously limited space, and as we look at CTV interfaces, limited spaces there too. What's your negotiation points? What's realistic? What's difficult to secure? And then we'll go to Sean.
So in many ways, obviously a lot of content owners still thinks about FAST as it's just a very simple content sales proposition. Unfortunately, it isn't. It's a very complex sort of model which requires the kind of processes and workflows similar to ad-supported channels. And that also includes, where you go into those deals, just making sure that you negotiate your positioning on the screen with the promotional, with the kind of the real estate tools which are available. FAST, in a way, is better than TV channels, the kind of the linear channel, when it comes to the EPG positioning, because it's simpler. Usually the content is being grouped into the specific genre, specific themes. So in that respect, and it's seamless. So in that respect, it's much easier to kind of go to a certain section and make sure you find that content that you like. However, you can't really control the EPG slots. The things are so movable and just, change so much, and it all depends on this combination of curation or AI, that your only way actually to manage this content discoverability is stay really close with the platform, understand what the promotional opportunities are on the UI, and constantly make sure that you provide highlights, you provide themes, you come up with different playlists. And also what is really important is the artwork, high-res quality artwork, which will make you stand out of the crowd, and tagging, which is something very new
Tagging
for content
and
owners.
yeah, so tagging is a big
Creating
thing.
the tagging library in local languages. And I would say those two kind of elements.
In local languages, that's a very important point. And we'll talk about the challenges of localization in a second. That's a very interesting point, and it goes back to what we were saying previously, which is, when you're looking at library content that is third and fourth window, do you really have those assets, and can you really deliver those assets? So you need a lot more assets in order to be able to promote yourself in a fast environment, and it's something to consider when you're putting together a service. Sean, do you have anything to add to Kash's excellent response to that question?
I completely agree. At a level of negotiation, when Banjay Rights is working with the connected TV platforms, we're looking at all various elements of distribution. So it could be fast channels, it could be VOD offerings, it could be working with owned and operated. So I completely agree. Content discoverability is key. And that's really how we're only going to see success across all of these areas of distribution. The hope would be that, of course, as you work with the platforms and you launch fast channels, you work with the owned and operated, you have a VOD offering, then it's going to be a nice ecosystem of distribution. It's about working with the platform on the actual platform itself for marketing, but also off-platform as well. And I think that's quite powerful in the sense of, I agree with Kasha, have a 12-month marketing calendar which aligns with the platform's needs, the tentpoles, the requirements, and program accordingly. That's really how you're going to get that on-platform benefits, but leverage what you have off-platform as well. So Banjay Rights also owns and operates a number of social media accounts dedicated to these single IPs that we're launching in the fast space. Deal or No Deal, Survivor, The Biggest Loser, launching branded channels as well on social media for Horizons to allow for cross-promotion. Of course, we'll have our own distribution strategy on social media, but then we can drive our own owned audiences to these platforms. And we work not exclusively across all of our major connected TV platforms too. So we'll be driving to the likes of Pluto, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, Freevee. So it's really about leveraging not only what you can do on the platform with the marketing teams, but also on your owned and operators.
I think that's an excellent point. I keep on talking about that on my LinkedIn posts, and that is the nature of marketing is changing, and nowhere faster than for fast, because of the nature of the audiences and where they go to choose where they're going to view. So obviously social and the social conversation becomes incredibly important, addressing that up front and using it to leverage a position that's a distinguishing position, building on your fan base. So we can talk about that. Single IP propositions often come with very dedicated fan base. What's your experience? Because of course you have a certain marketing style for Pluto generally, which is a younger demographic who tend to make their choices very much on their social feeds, collaboratively with what they're discussing with their friends. Can you give us some insight as to how you can super serve in that area in order to be able to deliver some real points of differentiation and drive people to your services in a fast environment?
Yeah, sure. So there's sort of two areas here. One is actually marketing the content on the service. And I think both as Kasia and Sean have said, we work closely with content providers to help, figure out a nice calendar of content that's coming, the different peaks and, relevant times to launch content. And then we as a service work with the platforms that carry Pluto to then be like, hey, this month we have this new channel. So here's, why don't you market it or highlight it or feature it? So there's sort of like a cycle there between the content provider, the platform, and the service. in terms of marketing Pluto, we've recently, which has been quite nice, announced in December Drew Barrymore as our new global brand ambassador. She did a campaign in the US and Canada, and will sort of be doing one in the coming months in the UK as well. So again, it's just, she has been an interesting choice, someone who is familiar, someone who spans different genres and sort of decades, and people I think can recognize, and sort of is going to be working on Pluto. So we do a lot of work on brand recognition in addition to the content work as well.
That's interesting because you have that younger demographic. Harry, I'm going to go to you now and ask you whether you are developing tools, or what tools do you have available to facilitate all of this? I'm thinking promotional tools for promoting banners, emails, and so forth. What do you provide services with, and is this democratic, or do you customize it by channel provider?
From a marketing perspective, between the platform and the content partner, that's a completely independent chain of events, and we don't involve as a technology provider in the space.
But I guess what you can provide, and this goes to the next point, which is the data and the reporting requirements, which would drive some of the decisions as to what's impactful and not. Do you want to tell us about some of the challenges you have and some of the opportunities that you've created for people in terms of aggregating data and the different measurement structures you have across all the complex platform systems? And this is where, by the way, as many of you will know, this is where it gets very complicated on FAST, really, because different platforms have different requirements and different reporting and different levels of transparency. And for content owners, that is a real challenge, which having an aggregating partner like Amagi can help to some extent resolve. Do you want to talk about that challenge?
See, tech partners in the space can provide analytics both in terms of viewership as well as advertising related for elements of the delivery chain which we touch. For example, if you see distribute and then monetize, there are platforms like, for example, Pluto, which manage that holistically. They see it as a part of their degree of control over end consumer experience, even on the core, the nitty-gritties of the tech which delivers some of that. And there are platforms who exclusively work with partners, technology partners like Amagi, where we have access to pretty much what end consumers watch, and we can synthesize that data in an anonymous fashion and present it back to media owners as well as platforms. And there are platforms which are a hybrid, which maybe manage part of the services completely in-house, part of the services they work with tech providers. So you have a hybrid there. On a broad basis, can data be democratic? Yes. But on a broad basis, if you see, both platforms and media owners would see that data as being core to their IP, because it defines behaviors in terms of how end consumers behave with their content or behave with a platform holistically. Yeah. So there are there are nuances to it, which is very difficult to simplify. We are working with platforms, at least few platforms, to see if data models can be evolved or a certain set of nomenclatures can be evolved, where intellectual properties, or at least how different either a platform or a content partner sees the data, can be presented differently without compromising on anything that each party in the chain would think of as very exclusive to them in terms of what they want to control.
And we've heard a lot about this during these sessions about, some of the challenges of different reportings and different measurement systems, not unique to FAST, but also to the advertising market as well. And there is a lot of effort being done to create opportunities there. So obviously the business enablers are content distribution and enablers are content distribution and ad sales. Before we finish on this, I'd like to go to a couple of slides which has been kindly provided from Amagi's FAST report, which I think, So, which I think provides some interesting insight, and I just thought it would be useful for this room to share those insights. So there are top 7 genres by two things. One is it hours viewed per household?
This HOV is hours of viewing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then ad impressions. And it's interesting to see that. This is in the EU, and so therefore it's a fairly early stage of FAST. We can see that factual formats, information-based formats work very well and form the majority of it. Did you want to speak to this at all, Harry, from your point of view, or did anyone want to speak and comment on this based on what you know of what you're putting out to the market?
Yeah, I can just briefly speak because it's actually quite an interesting slide. And obviously there is always this, quite often, again, content owners are very much focused on hours of view, while reality is the monetization, the impression may not follow the same pattern.
Correct.
But I would, in a strange way, I would generally notice that definitely certain genres perform much better in terms of monetization. Like, for example, factual and documentaries. That's where we see the biggest kind of inventory fill rates, as opposed to the hours of view, where we actually see on the kind of more fan-based iconic IPs.
And it's interesting if you're looking at this this data. So you've got that's revealed there, and you've got reality shows performing quite well, which you would know all about. And I find that fascinating. Old reality shows and game formats tend to perform very well on FAST.
And I think it really comes back to that notion of FAST channels being a lean-back viewing experience, which if you've got sticky IP, which is recognizable in the market, and you've got volume, and it's repeatable, you can watch in, you can tune in at any given time if you've missed the start. The hope there, of course, as you get the hours of viewing, as Kasia rightfully mentioned, you want those ad impressions to follow, because Banjir Rights, of course, is certainly looking at this as a commercial opportunity, and you obviously need to see those return on investment. But we're certainly seeing great success with our reality shows.
And this is, of course, based on a proportion of overall fast viewing. It's the proportion that was anonymized and able to be reported in the Amagi fast reports. So, but it's still a very interesting indication of where we're at in terms of genre.
See, just one comment on the earlier slide. See, news is a hero genre in the US. It performs exceedingly well.
That's interesting.
Perhaps, obviously, you can categorize news as entertainment in the US in certain ways.
Right? I think that's a good point, especially at the moment.
But news, sports as genres have specialty viewing, and you can have a much higher CPMs. Decreased news fill rates is perhaps a reflection of the market in terms of maturity, possibly, or in terms of period of measurement. And we're seeing, again, if we compare it, data points or growth patterns to US over time, we think the growth patterns in Europe, especially UK, Germany as lead markets, are perhaps a year and a half, couple of years behind in terms of indicators.
How fascinating. So sports and news.
We would see all of those picking up, essentially.
And we haven't talked about the CPM piece, obviously, and this is interesting as sports and news grow in Europe. We'll probably see that the proportions change to reflect what's happening in the US, and as other premium genres come in, we'll also probably see higher CPMs and therefore a different volume of ad impressions and value creation as a result of that. So. Very interesting. Thank you very much. That was very insightful. So this is interesting, just reflecting more of the same, really, in that slide. It's kind of amplifying what we've just said. So when you're looking at the genres, movies is topping that. Not entirely surprising. That's a fairly easy, early piece of content to aggregate, and as movie services have declined, obviously FAST is a new opportunity there. Lots of archives there. News we've discussed, documentaries as well. Music does well in FAST, which is interesting, and sports. So we can expect all of this to change in generally over the next few years as the market matures. This is interesting, and it is interesting to me because it doesn't necessarily reflect viewership, but it shows that the UK is leading the way in terms of monetization, and that is probably reflected in all of your experiences for your, well, some of you don't have UK channels. I would say the BBC, but Germany is the next big market, and then the others are quite far behind. So my question about that is it because it's early days, or is it because the agencies haven't really caught up yet with FAST and are learning about FAST and will soon start to deliver more? Harry, did you want to make a comment on that?
I think it's a mix of both, plus availability of content as well.
Okay.
The market's mature, so it's a market created by content, viewership, and advertising coming together. It's early stages is how we're seeing rest of the EU at this stage.
So,
to jump in, because I think one really important element here is obviously, as much as the digital advertising is important, and I think this kind of a shift from small to a big screen helps to grow the CPMs. However, what's really, really important is for CTVs, for aggregators, actually develop direct relationship with big media houses, because if the big budgets don't shift, unfortunately, I don't think those numbers will particularly grow. And for those big budgets to shift, we need data. We need a single source of data to convince advertisers it's okay now to invest in the FAST.
And I think that's been a really big point of discussion here during these sessions, and I think we're going to see a lot of movement on that front in the next few years, and it's critical on the CTV as FAST becomes a very important part of their content ecosystem there. The monetization of those services needs to follow, and we are seeing it in the UK actually. We are seeing media spend across linear and CTV as a single spend, but we're not seeing it in other territories quite so much. This is an interesting slide because it puts both of those points next to each other. So you've got number of hours views and ad impressions. Thank you, Harry, for sharing that with us from the FAST report. What's particularly interesting is if you look at the territories, UK hours viewed, ad impressions, Germany. Do you want to just maybe have a couple of words on that slide? I find it fascinating.
Germany, the ads business we're seeing is a lot more mature than the rest of the markets on the digital side.
Okay.
That's what you're seeing as a reflection here.
Exactly the point we just made, yeah.
Also on the flip side, on the other side of it, Germany, there's a free, again, interestingly, in every European market, the free-to-air mix is very different. And that also influences some of the hours of viewing numbers you're seeing here.
That's fascinating. Kasia, I know you have to go next door, but we are going to have a Q&A session in a minute, so please bear with us. Kasia, you have permission to depart whenever you like, and I'll hold everyone else here. So I think we haven't talked in detail about distribution because we really wanted to focus on the practicalities of actually building and launching and creating a FAST service. Obviously, distribution we've touched on as a complex process across multiple services, but I think at this stage it's probably relevant and helpful to open up to questions. Does anyone have any particular thing that they want to question that they want to ask? Do you want to say who you are? And here we go. I will share my microphone with you.
Thank you. My name is John Jordan from Video Elephant. So we are in the fast space and getting more into the fast space. But the question I have is, across all those sections that we covered today very well, thank you, what's the biggest challenge? Of all those four, which one do you think is the biggest one? Especially, Sean, for you with the 21 channels. What has been the biggest barrier to your success across those channels, or continues to be?
And I think that's a very fair question.
Thank you.
A very fair question to ask. And I think from a commercial perspective, it's always making sure you get a return on investment on your fast channel proposition. That's certainly something that Balance Rights has a forefront looking at P&Ls before we do any launches. So whilst we have 21 unique fast channels, they have been curated for each market, and of course they've been put into a position before going out and being placed onto any platform. So for us, we recognize that the commercial models typically in the fast channel space are either revenue share basis or ad inventory split basis. So what we have to recognize there, of course, that is revenue coming in arrears, but typically for a fast channel proposition, you are paying for facilitator costs. So you've always got to balance up the fast channel cost versus, of course, the return on investment. And I think it's very key when you look at your revenue returns and opportunities to maximize that yield is how can you control more of that advertising inventory? Is there option to work with solutions or have in-house sales team to either look at exclusively 100% advertising inventory split models or looking at advertising backfill rights? And I think that's really the commercial position that we would take when looking at fast channel launches.
Does anyone else have any? Do you want to answer that at all? Anyone or no? Okay. Oh, hi, Maria. What question do you want? Let me just give you a microphone and I'll play.
Could you talk a little bit, sorry, it's Maria from 3Vision. Could you talk a little bit about the different viewing patterns to single IP or multi-IP channels? Does it matter? And just a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I can talk a little bit about that. Thanks for the question. On Pluto, I'd say there's, in terms of what we carry, it's about 50% single IP, 50% sort of mixed genre. And single IP, when they're really strong IP, I think do really well. We see the likes of like Dog the Bounty Hunter, Judge Judy, CSI, big recognizable names, high volume shows. They just lead to really high watch times. People go in, they know what they're getting. So I'd say the performance of those are really strong. But alongside, there's also movies just by default happen to have longer watch time. So Pluto TV movies will do well as well. So it does vary. But I'd say a single series, if the series of the IP is strong, are always perform well.
I was kind of wondering about, you talked about scheduling the multi-IP, and I just wondered whether you see a different viewing. I assume you want people to stay in as long as possible. That's one of your main priorities. But in the multi-IP, do you see a peak in viewing at certain times of the day, and does that differ between single IP and multi?
Okay, so what is the viewing pattern and how does it vary by...
I guess that's particularly relevant because in linear we always see a viewing peak when people are eating their meals in the evenings.
Yeah.
So does that reflect in
So
fast?
I think fast is slightly different in that often it's just sort of like a companion, like people will just have it on. It's low commitment viewing. So whereas I think TV traditional peaks when like there's something on to watch, that lean in experience. I think fast often will be comfort on in the background. So I think there is a difference in viewing where it can be quite consistent in the day as well. Because I think just the use case is slightly less commitment from the user.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Is there any data that you've seen, Harry, that reflects any particular usage pattern? I suppose it varies also
as a
by
technology provider. We see we differentiate on the multi-branded channels. We bring out data to help schedule differently or provide elements of analytics for people to make decisions. But obviously, we're not experts at programming.
Yeah. So anyone? Ben, I'm going to again play microphone.
Hi, Ben Keane. Aquila, if I remember correctly from your last financials, monthly active users still growing. Ad revenues pretty much flat. So does that mean we've already hit the top of this growth?
No, I don't believe that. So I think that we globally on Pluto have 79 million MAUs. We've crossed the 1 billion mark in terms of ad sales revenue just last year. I think the market's sort of reflecting the overall conditions, perhaps, slightly softer, but I don't think that sort of indicates a pattern or a downward trajectory at the minute. I think Pluto still is a very attractive opportunity for advertisers, but because it sort of firstly taps into audiences that perhaps might not be reachable otherwise. So sort of those SVOD only homes, those IP first homes, provides, broadcast quality, brand safe environment with high watch times because of the passion verticals that people engage in, and speed to monetization as well, because the minute you're in the app you're watching something. So I think Pluto still remains a very attractive sort of place for advertisers.
So growth will come again.
Yes, I believe so.
Hi, I'm Amanda from Vaxis Orca. I'm wondering, how do you see catch up and start over for fast channels?
Catch up and start over.
Yes.
How does that apply in terms of your fast channels? What's the relationship between those? So that's part of the ecosystem. So you're well placed to answer that.
Yeah. Currently, in terms of fast, because of the way I think we schedule and because of the nature of the channels, that's sort of not utility that's currently sort of available. We're sort of really looking at what we do at Pluto is work with content providers to take a bunch of VOD assets basically and program them quite flexibly and fluidly through our programming team, and they sort of can respond using the data. So we're really, the experience is meant to be sort of like a lean back, easy viewing. So we're not currently engaging in the sort of, there is a VOD section on Pluto. So where if people are looking for something specific or would look, sort of want that sort of experience, there is an area they can go. But from a linear perspective, it's really just designed to be simple and to provide what it says on the tin sort of thing.
That's interesting. And Ben, did you have another question that you wanted to share? I'm just going to give you the mic. Yeah, of course.
Sorry to take another.
No, that's okay.
Given the the ad cake is not growing massively at the moment overall, whose share are you eating?
Bit of provocation.
I would contest the base premise, right? I don't. I would really contest the base premise on the ad share not growing.
But the overall revenue cake isn't growing much at all, right? It's pretty flat at the moment. So you must be taking some share if you're growing. Whose is it? I don't
think so overall. The ads are growing significantly for us as a business. We've invested significantly in building an ads org. So do you have specific data you're
you just need to look at the overall revenue picture. It's not growing very much at all.
But again, Pluto's pitch, maybe then Pluto's comment about Pluto's revenue not growing could be a variety of other factors. And we are seeing some recessionary trends where there was a brief dip towards later part of last year. But we're seeing all signs of advertisers continuing to spend and spending more on fast. What's happened from an ad trend, if you go back in time, is we've seen broadcast ad revenues dipping. That's primarily because there were other avenues of addressability to reach consumers with a lot more social, a lot more digital-based consumption. But as more streaming's improved, we're seeing clear movement in terms of either fill rate increase or CPM increase in terms of how new ad SKUs can come in, new ways of targeting can come in. And the whole premise of fast is the ads pretty much are doubling year on year, at least in terms of what we see in terms of ad revenue as well. So
you're taking share from legacy broadcast then, legacy linear broadcast?
I wouldn't say so, right? I would say we are getting. So see, we can't say that in entirety, right? Because if I'm a marketer, I'm looking at targeting specific cohorts, and my behavior as a marketer over the last decades completely changed, and how I look at perspectives of frames of reaching consumers completely changed. I would say we are pulling back into TV revenue, which was lost to more addressable mediums. And so I wouldn't split it as broadcast and streaming and just talk on its.
ITVX is an example of the opposite of what you've just said, actually, where they have integrated the fast. And they are looking at pulling back revenue into a different audience and a broader audience and broader opportunities. And I think the other factor to consider too, in terms of just pure revenue, is that as the FAST model evolves and the different content evolves, we will probably have a different CPM rate and a different yield on the ads. So at the moment, it's early days and it's like this, and let's see what happens. But anyway, good question. Thank you. Anybody else have a question at this stage? Ah, great. Hello. Dear again.
I'm Tu from Extreme Reach. You mentioned that like you creating tag and label in local language is very important. Can you please expand a bit more on it? And currently, how does brands are doing it?
Track and
creating tag and label in local language,
so that you can actually transfer it into local language.
Is it a challenge? And currently, how? I'm just curious to know how brands are doing it.
Localization of languages has always been a challenge. It's expensive to do it, be it subtitling or audio. There are companies which have come in, brought in AI to simplify effort, and there's a lot of that happening already, even for broadcast. But then there are questions on quality and the accuracy of some of that. For FAST, we are seeing companies. There are some online closed captions and subtitling companies which do at least English and Spanish in a very cost-effective manner. So there are companies using such services and bringing them onto FAST platforms for distribution, which is maybe a lot more forgiving than how broadcast quality is perceived today. But as we become mainstream, that becomes a key requirement as you look to take content internationally. And the quality accuracy requirements would obviously improve. But hopefully tech will evolve in terms of automated engines and open API engines to do some of that.
Okay, I think our panelists have been really generous with their time, and we're very, very grateful for that. Does anyone have one last question? Scanning the room, I can't see anyone, which means you're off the hook. So can I just say a big thank you? It's been a really amazing discussion.